Hello there, Trek friends! After having a really negative interaction in a live stream recently, and seeing how people battle in comment sections across the internet about what's canon and what's not, has left me with the distinct impression that many don't understand the difference between the meaning of what is canon versus lore, and what takes place in the quote-unquote prime universe. Let's start with canon. Within Star Trek, there are even two types of canon. The first and most visible is alpha canon. Almost anything you see on screen, be it television shows or movies, are alpha canon. Even the stuff that contradicts other stuff is still canon. Though that definition has a further caveat. Whoever is currently in charge of the franchise can decide what's alpha canon and what's not. For example, in my lifetime, the animated series from the 1970s was canon, and then declared no longer canon by Gene Roddenberry when TNG was released, recanonized towards the end of the Rick Berman run, and then declared non-canon by Alex Kurtzman again in recent years. But the show has spawned ideas that have been canonized by other more recent Trek. Its cousins, the totally not serious very short Treks, are also not canon from the get-go. But everything else, including all the newer Trek shows like Discovery, Strange New Worlds, and Lower Decks, are all canon despite what many fans claim. The other type of canon is beta canon. This is where the previously mentioned animated series now lives, but is primarily the realm where content of novels, comic books, and other related properties exist. They aren't to be believed as gospel truth within the wider Star Trek pantheon, but have occasionally become alpha canonized by other on-screen Trek. Many heavily contradict each other much more than televised Trek, which most of the time tries to keep things consistent. Lore is an in-between gray area that can be inferred from canon, but is never explicitly said. Some examples include the god of Shakari being a Cytherian, based on what we later learn in TNG's Nth Degree, or the space jellies from Encounter at Farpoint being the same creatures spawning from the nebula in Picard's third season. Lore is open-ended and is a lot of what Trek tubers like me explore because it's all opinion and not currently set in stone. These usually make for the most interesting discussions online as well. The thing that seems to stir up the nastiest discussions, especially in the last few years, is what takes place in a particular timeline or universe. What stirred up some of the recent controversy online is the Lower Decks finale showing us a Discovery-era Klingon, which has caused a segment of the fanbase to reignite a long-held belief that Discovery doesn't take place in the same universe or timeline, which for the purposes of this video can be viewed as the same things, though a case can be made that there are subtle differences between the two. Let's make this clear, because the creators of modern Trek have been very clear. Discovery, Strange New Worlds, and literally every show that's ever been Trek takes place in the same universe and timeline. Here's a question that should put this controversy to bed. If Lower Decks had shown human-looking, big-eyebrow Klingons from TOS, would anyone anywhere be asking if the original series was still canon? Or has this whole thing only become a talking point recently because of a group of haters? Anyway, back to the idea of universes and timelines. There are a ton, but I'd like to focus here on the so-called prime universe. Because here's a thought experiment for you. Is anything we actually see still the prime universe ever since, say, Tomorrow is Yesterday? There have been tiny changes made to the timeline in almost every episode in the franchise that deals with timey-wimey stuff. And as we see in TNG's parallels, for every action, there's an equal and opposite universe created for every possible other choice. So, if anything changes, are you still in the prime timeline anymore? For me at least, to start thinking about Trek as being in many different universes gets confusing and completely detracts from whatever stories are trying to be told. Now, there are purposely built universes and timelines in Trek. One of the most overt is the fandom-named Kelvin timeline, that is the setting of the three most recent movies from 2009 through 2016. There's the Mirror Universe, where many stories have been told, There are a ton of others, and it's fun once in a while to tell stories through a new lens. But ultimately, the bulk of Star Trek is told in the Prime universe and timeline. No matter how loud the loudest detractors claim something isn't Trek, or isn't in the same timeline. I hope that this puts to rest some of the questions that have swirled around the show for years. There are so many of these descriptive words which some use interchangeably, but actually have very different meanings.